Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that most of you have heard that the next bug is here. You know, I've been saying for months that this is the song that never ends. I don't think that this bug that they've come out with is the one that they're going to use to scare the bejesus out of everyone into complying to do what they want you to do. I mean, I won't mention the countries, but there are several countries right now that, in my opinion, have turned into a 100% dictatorship, where the government is so tyrannical against its people that it is a complete dictatorship, where you cannot do what you want to do, you cannot go where you want to go, when you want to go, you can't even step in your front yard if you want to. But I digress. So I went ahead and did a little bit of history. I'm asking myself here, what will be the final straw? What will it be? And I've also mentioned in the past that, at least for here in the United States, that Americans have historically been very patient, for a lack of better words. Meaning that Americans will take it and take it and take it until they can't take no more. Alright, when you lose everything, you have nothing else to lose, and then you do some crazy things. And I believe we're not there yet. I believe that this government here, whomever it may be controlled by, is testing the people and taking notes, wondering, when can we do the final step? How many people will we be able to have propagandized into accepting whatever we tell them to do? And this next one here, if there is another lockdown, I keep hearing a lot of words, a lot of talk about there's going to be another lockdown because they found another bug. I believe it's just another step to see how far they can take it. They are going to try to destroy the middle class completely. Now, most of the middle class, I would say probably 50% of the middle class, if not more, here in the last year and a half or so, has been destroyed. They are now below that 50% percentile that determines whether you're a middle class or below middle class, all right, in the United States at least. So they've done a good job at destroying most of the middle class. But they need to destroy it all, ladies and gentlemen. They need to destroy it all so that they can rebuild it again how they want it. And how is it that they want to rebuild it? Well, a lot of you know. We're going to get into that here in a minute. But I wanted to read to you this quick, very short read here. British Reforms and Colonial Resistance from 1763 to 1766, right before the shot that was heard around the world. When the French and Indian War finally ended in 1763, no British subject on either side of the Atlantic could have foreseen the coming conflicts between the parent country and its North American colonies. Even so, the seeds of these conflicts were planted during and as a result of this war. In January 1763, Great Britain's national debt was more than £122 million, an enormous sum for the time. Does that sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? Interest on the debt was more than £4.4 million per year. Figuring out how to pay the interest alone absorbed attention of the king and his ministers, meaning that they spent all their time trying to figure out how they can collect enough money from their citizenry just to pay the interest on the debt. Does that sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? Bigger and bigger taxes, more and more taxes, but it's not for the poor, it's not for the middle class. When the government and or the Federal Reserve and or the Treasury says, yes, taxes have to go up, it's not for the poor, it's only for the rich, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so those of you that are not wealthy, don't worry, it's not for you. You won't be paying the taxes. And of course, I'm being sarcastic. Nor was the problem of the imperial debt the only one facing British leaders in the wake of the 7 Years' War. Maintaining order in America was a significant challenge. Even with Britain's acquisition of Canada from France, the prospects of peaceful relations with the Native American tribes were not good. As a result, the British decided to keep a standing army in America. Imagine that, ladies and gentlemen. I guess the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, does it? How many standing armies do we have in how many different countries? This decision would lead to a variety of problems with the colonists. British leaders also felt the need to tighten control over their empire, to be sure that laws, regulations, imperial trade, and navigation had been on the books for generations, but American colonists were notorious for evading these regulations. They were even known to have traded with the French during the recently ended war. From the British point of view, it was only right that American colonists should pay their fair share. Those words sound familiar? If additional revenue could also be realized through stricter control of navigation and trade, so much the better. Pretty much saying that the more that we can tax them, the better. But better for who? Thus, the British began their attempts to reform the imperial system. And ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, that is what's happening today. It is an attempt that is being made to reform the system by which we have grown to be the freest and wealthiest country in the world. And don't get me wrong, I understand that no longer are we wealthy. It is nothing but a facade. But it's because those freedoms that we were able to exercise made us into the freest and wealthiest nation in the world. Because only with freedom can you prosper. Only with freedom can you prosper, ladies and gentlemen. China may seem like it's prospering, but who? Not the people. Not the people, ladies and gentlemen. They're not free. In China, if you jaywalk in China, by the time that you get to the other side of the road, the money's already been deducted from your phone. Whatever that fine was. Does that sound like due process? In 1764, Parliament enacted the Sugar Act and attempted to raise revenue in the colonies through a tax on molasses. Although this tax had been on the books since 1730, smuggling and laxity of enforcement had blunted its sting. Now, however, the tax was to be enforced. An outcry arose from those affected, and the colonists implemented several effective protest measures that centered around boycotting British goods. Then, in 1765, Parliament enacted the Stamp Act, which placed taxes on paper, playing cards, and every legal document created in the colonies. Since this tax affected virtually everyone and extended British taxes to domestically produced and consumed goods, the reaction in the colonies was pervasive. The Stamp Act crisis was the first of many that would occur over the next decade and a half. Alright, now why do I say this, ladies and gentlemen? Why did I read this? Mainly to show you what it is that people put up with. This was in 1765. By 1765, the British, they had already put so many taxes, levies, regulations, laws upon the American colonists that you would think, my goodness, how can they put up with it? But look at the date, 1765. It wasn't until 1776 where the shot that was heard around the world, where I believe it was 100 and something or 70 something American colonists that were trying to hold off 200 plus redcoats. And then a lot of American colonists lost their lives. I think it was 8 or 9. And several were injured. And that was when Paul Revere was saying, the British are coming, the British are coming. And then they rounded up a few colonists with their arms. It took over a decade of these oppressive measures. And then it took a very big crisis where the colonists finally said, there's nothing else that we can do. There's nothing, we cannot live like this anymore, because this living like this is not worth living. That's how long it took, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I say to prepare, because this is not going to be a microwave dinner. This is going to be a slow and steady burn. And eventually the people will have had enough. And that's why I say, never give up your 2A. Never. Because eventually there will come a time where we will need that instrument of liberty. I want to go ahead and go over something else real quick, just to show you where we're at, where we really are at. And that's the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx was paid by the League of the Just, which was later named to the Communist League, in 1847 to write the Communist Manifesto, and paid again to rewrite it in 1848. I think I might have said 1947, but obviously 1847 and then 1848. The manifesto was intended to incite violent revolution and was a recipe for tyranny itself, and was later used as propaganda to blind followers to the realities of the brutal dictatorships that oppressed all workers and slaughtered millions under communist rule. And here, the little man with the weird mustache, right, that wrote Mein Kampf, and China's Mao's Little Red Book, served similar evil and deadly purposes. Many dictators throughout history and today attempt to disguise their tyranny with fancy labels and phony philosophies to make slavery seem somehow just and essential. Another example was the earlier doctrine of divine rule of kings. These 10 steps are just a part of the manifesto, the full text of which can be found on the web. And you can find the entire book on the web to read for free, ladies and gentlemen. Western nations, including the United States, have gradually implemented virtually all of Marx's 10 key steps toward creating a dictatorship. What are some examples that you can find? I can find several of examples, but I'm going to read you the 10 that are actually on there. Americans would be wise to study the 10 planks and demand that the President and Congress abolish all laws and regulations and agencies which govern these and all other unconstitutional seizures of power. Communism was never intended to free man, but to enslave them. Now let me go ahead and read these for you. Number 1, the abolition of property and land, and application of all rents of land to public purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, do I even have to go over that? Do you own your land? Does anyone in the United States own their land outright? You know, there may be some places where you still do. I know that about 50 or 60 miles north of Fairbanks, there is some state land for sale where no taxes are required. No property taxes at all are required. However, they can change that law anytime. So right now I would say for the 99.999% of everyone, no, you don't own your land. You rent your land from the state. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Self-explanatory. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. Have you seen what's happening to the small farmers in the United States? What happens when the parents pass away and they try to leave the farm to their children? Their children usually have to sell off part of the farm just to be able to pay the taxes on the land that their parents pay taxes on for their entire lives, and that purchase with money that they pay taxes on. It says here, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. That I can't really comment on. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with a state capital and an exclusive monopoly. I don't know what the name of that lady is that they're trying to get into the comptroller general or the comptroller of the currency position, but this is exactly what she is promoting. That there be one central bank that controls everyone's account and that decides what people should get paid for whatever job they do. If you haven't looked into it, look into it. I think her last name is Amorosa or something like that. Don't remember. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Well, ladies and gentlemen, one would argue that the state is owned by two factions, by the Federal Reserve and by the corporations like your Alphabet. And what do they control? They control all communication. This, I don't think, has truly happened yet physically, but I'm going to tell you how I think that it has happened. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. Pretty much saying that the state runs the factories. The factories are like state-owned, right? And, of course, they're not state-owned on paper. But, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this. If you open up a pizza shop, let's say in New York, wherever it may be, how many regulations do you have to follow in order to be able to just run your pizza shop? Do you really think you own that pizza shop? If you don't pay your taxes, let's say you bought the space, that it belongs to you on paper, do you think you own it? No. You have to pay your taxes. Do you think you're running that pizza shop the way you want to run it? No. How many regulations do you have to abide by? Every little thing that they want you to do. The government is pretty much running your business. It's telling you how to run your business. You're just doing it for them. And then you're giving them a cut of what you make after you run your business the way they want you to run it, so that they can keep for themselves. Equal liability of all labor. Pretty much, ladies and gentlemen, the government decides what you get paid. And everyone gets paid the same. Pretty much. Ask Billy MD how much they get paid in Cuba. How much a doctor, how much an emergency doctor gets paid in Cuba. Emergency room doctor, right? Here it says, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Pretty much big farm, big agriculture pretty much has this covered. Like I said, big corporations and the central bank own our government. They own the congressmen. They own the senators. All right, they own them. And they tell them what to do and what laws to pass. And number 10, ladies and gentlemen, free education for all children in public schools. What's going on now? Free community college. They're trying to pass where you can get free community college. The thing is, it's not free. So this new bug is coming up, and lockdowns are now the new word. Every video you turn on, oh, we're going back into lockdown. Before that it was, what was it? That smallpox. Now it's, this new bug is coming out. This new extension of the bug is coming out, right? So this is not the crisis that they're looking for. This is not going to be it. Too many people are awake. Too many people are awake to this song that never ends, that keeps changing halfway through. It keeps changing halfway through. Now there's this new thing coming out. This is not the crisis that they're going to use to try to enslave us. All right, so this may help in destroying more of the middle class. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, let me do something different here. I wrote some notes here ahead of time. Let me just read my notes, see how this goes. So I put here, they're going to have to introduce a crisis that is much scarier than what's going on now. This right now, with how many people are awake, this is not a scary crisis, right? This new bug that's coming out. So they're going to have to introduce a much scarier crisis. All right, here's the second one. Hope that the scared public will willingly submit, and then they will introduce their digital currency that is controlled by the central bank. In other words, a privately owned institution that cares not about the American people is who's going to be in charge of your labor, of how much your labor is worth. If their next crisis is not enough to scare you into submission, then I believe that they will implement a worldwide financial collapse that will erase all of the paper wealth that exists. If this happens, it will not hurt the wealthy one bit, ladies and gentlemen. It will not hurt the wealthy one bit. You know why? Because what have the wealthy been doing for the last several years? They've been getting out of paper and getting into assets. And when we have that great financial crash that will eventually happen, when that happens, what will be affected the most is that all paper wealth will pretty much be destroyed, if not almost all of it. Because during the last financial crash, although a lot of people lost their homes, the homes were still there. So if you already own your home, if you're debt free, if you own something, if you have this bottle will not disappear during a financial crash. I already own it. It's mine. So if I'm a wealthy individual and right now I'm buying $100,000 Rolexes, if I'm buying $1 million paintings, if I'm buying $100 million yachts, if I'm buying bunkers and land in other countries and in this country and farmland and all that kind of stuff, once the financial crisis, once the financial collapse occurs, that land is not going away. They already own it. Or at least they own the title, meaning that they can pay taxes on it. But they own it. It's not going to go away. What are you going to be left with? If you have a home where you still own a mortgage, where you're still paying on a mortgage, you don't own that home. You own the mortgage. You own the payments. They belong to you because you have to make them. But the physical home does not belong to you. Once cash is completely out of the picture, a social credit score will be introduced. And what does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? If you don't toe the company line, then you're demonetized. So, ladies and gentlemen, when is the shot around the world going to be heard in this generation? I don't believe it's just yet. I believe that they have to exhaust everything they need to exhaust. And of course, the year 2030 sounds like a very good year for that to be completed by. I believe that is their goal. Is that by that year that they completely own us and own everything. And that's why we prepare, ladies and gentlemen. We prepare because what are we going to do about it? Just like in 1763 or 66, it took a decade before people had finally had enough. And then that's when it started. That's when it started with 1776. Here we are in 1766 right now. And we need to be prepared so that when the day comes that we have to fight for our liberties, instead of being serfs and slaves for the rest of our lives, that we can be prepared to do so. And don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen. I've been shot at before. Violence is not in my nature. Alright? I detest it. Violence is not in my nature. And I would never tell anyone to use violence as a way to resolve a problem. But what I'm telling you is that eventually it is they that will use violence against us. And then the natural law says that if violence is being used against yourself, that you have to defend yourselves. That is why the gazelle has horns. And that is why we must never give up our horns. We must never give up our Second Amendment.